Today we are going to speak about leadership, and it's my pleasure to welcome our friend Saba Al Mubaslat. Saba is a very good friend of us for now many years, and I will not go through Saba biography, which is impressive, and all of you will have access to Saba's biography. But we are working together with Saba now for many years, and as you saw, she has a huge experience in the humanitarian field, in the leadership field. She traveled in many countries. She worked with famous international NGOs. And she recently, in May 2019, joined the Asfari Foundation as the CEO of the Asfari Foundation. And we decided with Saba to speak about leadership and reinventing leadership. We think that today, with the COVID-19 outbreak epidemic, and I hope that all of you are fine and your countries are also fine and safe, but we see that there is a strong lack of leadership. We can speak about political leadership, scientific leadership, but we need more leaders. And our will at AIMSA is to closely work with the young generation and the youth. And then we launched an initiative now for a few years, which is a fellowship program where we work with many fellows from different countries in the world. We have today with us Jeanette from Peru. We have Luthfi from Indonesia. Hello, Luthfi. We have Vedant from and Yashashree from India. We have Charlotte from Canada. And the objective of the conference is Saba is going to make a short introduction, and then we're going to have a dialogue between those young people, those young fellows, Saba, and all of you. Then feel free to participate to the conference, to ask your question. We will ask you to go through the Q&A and to write your question. We will then pick up your question and try to answer to them. But once again, the idea is to think about what do we need to do to reinvent leadership and to have your contribution to all. Then thank you again, Saba. Thank you, Yashashree, Charlotte, Vedant, Luthfi, and Jeanette for your contribution. Thank you for all of you participating to the call today. And Saba, I let you the floor.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. So good to be with you and the HAMSA friends and fellows. I think it's always refreshing to have young people, not saying that we're not young, but definitely much younger people coming in to share their wisdom with us. Maybe before we start talking about leadership, we need to distinguish between leadership and authority. While I think that authority and authoritarian figures have failed us miserably, particularly with the response to COVID-19, leadership is completely absent. Because while authority, at least from my perspective, is a social contract that is given to a person to implement a job description. That can be a president of a country, a prime minister, a health minister, a CEO of a foundation. Usually you give them a contract with a job description, you have expectations from them, and they agree to those expectations, and they should be able to deliver, and they should be held accountable when they do not deliver. Leadership is not necessarily a social contract. No one hires you to lead. You know, people hire you to occupy a position, and that's the authoritarian version of what we sometimes mistake for leadership. When it comes to leadership, it is really you advocating or leading on behalf of a purpose. And you give yourself the right, because you feel that you have something different to present, you give yourself the right to come up with an idea, advocate strongly for it, and gather people around you to support you in that attempt to leading to solve a problem or lead a change or advocate for equality, justice, what have you. So the way I see it, leadership is more of an art, based as much on judgment and intuition as on predefined skills. It emphasizes the significance of personal authority as the determining factor of effective leadership, as opposed to the authority vested in position or status. And that's what we have to really be clear and distinguish between. The qualities and experiences of an individual leader matter as much as, if not more even, than their job title. So you can find leaders at all levels of a hierarchy, be it a government hierarchy, an organization hierarchy. You can find leaders who can really mobilize and advocate for change at any level because they have specific individual characteristics that make them quite distinguished. There are five main areas of leadership qualities that I think we need to look at and maybe interrogate before we call someone a leader. The first one, from my perspective, is the strategic leadership skills that relate to the bigger picture. So these are not people who are narrow focused, they just want to get the job done and then leave. They have they are visionary people. They understand the context. They make sure to provide contextual analysis. So if you are in a country, yes, you can learn from models elsewhere, but you have to make sure that you look into the contextualized approach that make that particular model or intervention most relevant and most effective in your own context. They have clear vision. They know what they want to achieve. They know the end goal, and they attempt to achieve it, with a sense of ownership. The second set of skills is really the relational and communication qualities. And those are extremely important because that's how people can relate to you and that's how you can advocate or mobilize people to support you in your vision. So the ability to listen and learn from others, the ability to share information and articulate such information in a simple way that everyone can relate to. The minute leadership start becoming elite in its way of communicating with people, it loses the mass. So how do you keep the message clear to as many as possible is absolutely critical. And the courage to speak out. They're not fearful that they will lose their position. They're not fearful that their political party is going to throw them out of authority. They have, they communicate with integrity and they have the courage to challenge the status quo. Decision making and risk taking, I think, is self explanatory, and that's the third set of skills that we need to focus on. Management and organizational skills, again, another clear one. The fifth, which I would want to maybe elaborate a little bit on, is the personal qualities. So they say you can train anyone to become a leader. Mm, I beg to differ. There are personal qualities that you need to have and bring to the table, and maybe you can improve with time. Those mainly are being a principled person, not someone that can be persuaded as and when your interests change. Um, Acting with integrity. How many politicians do we know stick to what is integral to them and to the ones who voted them into whatever position after they become in authority? Being self-aware, knowing what you know and what you don't know, and invite others to complement what you do not have. It takes a lot of humbleness and humility to say, I know what I know, I know what I don't know, and that's where I'm going to invite others to support me. And I don't know what I don't know, and that's where I'm going to keep an open mind and be happy to be challenged, to be surprised by some odd knowledge that comes my way from anyone that I interact with. Determination, because there'll be so many reasons that might come your way to stop fighting for what you're fighting for. And energy and enthusiasm. As a leader, sometimes that energy comes by you encouraging those around you. Sometimes enthusiasm, puts a little bit of surge of energy into people's veins so that they can continue to push forward because the path to change is not paved. People resist change. Authority in particular resists change. Now, so this is just to set the context and to set the stage for what we're going to talk about. Coming from all of this, when Jean-Francois and Olivia and I started talking about, reimagining leadership, it was like, wait a minute, do we really have any imagination left in us this generation who graduated, from old school, learned the tough way the difference between authority and leadership, and are now at a time where their models are not necessarily proving to be the most successful, and then they talk on behalf the majority of the population of this planet of ours who happen to be young, but tend to say this is what youth want, but never consult with youth when it comes to their actual wants. So we said, wait a minute, Ahamsa is doing this great thing of bringing together those, very engaged, enthusiastic young fellows. Why don't we consult with them? So we had 2 rounds of discussions with the fellows that you see on the screen, and some of them maybe have their cameras off. But we had a discussion about if we are to reimagine leadership that is fit for today, leadership that includes you, if not even led by you, and leadership that is fit for your future. Because, we do hopefully all of us have a future, but I hope genuinely that the likes of us will take the back seat, advise, coach, mentor, but stop claiming that, we figured it all out and we are better positioned simply because we're older and we have more years of experience under our belts than the younger generation. So we opened the discussion with those young fellows, and they helped us reimagine new angles that must be explored if we are to talk about reimagining leadership. Some of those angles, and they were included maybe in the agenda, I'm not sure, is them arguing that not all movements should be born out of deficit. So instead of trying to advocate because of a lack position, we need to create movements that are enthusiastic, positive, and able to celebrate nations' sense of pride. And those are, in their opinion, the counter movements that need to inject some hope and some sense of belonging to who I am, where I come from, my roots, my origin, my race, my being. The second angle was really the role of technology, and let's not pretend. My generation. I'll speak about myself. We've learned how to use technology the hard way. My first encounterment with a computer was during the DOS times, and that was in my 3rd year of university. So we learned what is sufficient to keep us connected, but we are not as savvy when it comes to the usability of technology as the younger generation. And of course, we can't talk about technology without talking about a third angle, which is the new means of communication, the new means of mobilization, and the new ways of creating global tribes. And that is, of course, through social media. They all agreed that social media has to be factored into any talk about how we can reimagine leadership. Because from their perspective, it is no longer about mobilizing your neighborhood or your community. My community, from their perspective as younger generation, is extended beyond my geography. I can connect with the like-minded people no matter where they are, and they have their own definition and ways of reimagining the usability of social media for a better and more effective leadership. They talked endlessly about the importance of inclusivity, be it from a race, origin, religion, social, gender perspective. They all felt strongly that I am not different because of my skin color. I am not less because of my customs and my traditions. I am not a threat because of my religion. I am who I am as an individual because of my mindset. And that's where we can create common grounds. And I'd love to hear them talk about this because they talked about it in the most passionate way ever. They talked a lot about accountability, and they feel that while um, they're being pushed in a particular way, following a leader or following an authoritarian figure, when they misbehave or under-deliver or break the sense of trust between them and the mass that is following, there are no mechanisms for accountability. And so I'd love to hear them talking about that. And of course, they talked about COVID-19 endlessly, and they felt that this was a very good, comprehensive, global scale challenge that we could have either that could have either brought us together or put us apart. And unfortunately, from what we're seeing in terms of the so many different approaches countries took to address the pandemic and control it, the politicization of vaccine programs and distribution of vaccination, the misinformation that's being distributed on social media around COVID-19 and everything that has to do with it, it set the world apart and it created further divides instead of bringing people together. They had angles that they insisted should be included in the discussions, particularly around issues like childhood, the importance of education and knowledge sharing, and of course, issues around health and the equity of access to health, particularly to the most discriminated against groups, for example, transgender groups. So for 2 sessions, I was literally humbled, and it was really refreshing to hear that, yeah, I thought I knew it all, but here you are, you open yourself to wanting to learn from the younger generation, and they have a lot to share. So I don't think that I'm going to add anything new to the audience, because I'm sure that my source of knowledge is the same as theirs, all the papers and all the studies and the research, but a fresh, innocent, honest perspective coming from young people is the only thing that can make this session different than the typical sessions where we bring the leaders to talk about leadership. With that, I want to open the floor to the great bunch of leaders, present leaders, not future leaders, that we have, to shed a light on some of those angles that we have debated when we had our 2 sessions together. I'll start with that talk around the importance of a sense of collective nation pride. Where did that come and how does it fit into our talk today about leadership? Who would like to start? Yashashree, go ahead.
Hello, warm greetings to the other end. And so here I present talking about the sense of collective nation pride. According to me, we have to consider all the geographically and technologically untouched group as a part of our nation as well. And we have to consider them in certain decision making. And if we are not planning to consider them in the decision making, we should at least make sure that they are a part of that decision making. So let us take into consideration a certain tribe or a population that is comfortable settling out of the city. Now, technology cannot go and ask them to get connected with us. So it is very well said by Sangeeta Reddy. She is the joint MD of Apollo Hospital Enterprises, that care is shifting from hospital to the clinic, from clinic to home, and from home to 24/7 on the fingertips technologies. Now, ubiquitous access to care driven by the mobile phone. But in my point of view, not every person out there has mobile phone. There are people still very much facing very much hardships to get to the primary healthcare center right from their place. And now people who cannot even afford certain or a few wages out of their pocket, or they cannot even get themselves insured, what about them? Does technology take them into consideration? If it is going to take them into consideration, then we can have thumbs up for the upcoming technology. If it is not, then I think this is where we have to have good amount of talk on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yashashree. And I think you brought a number of points together, which is important because, when we talk about leadership, we cannot silo the factors because all the factors are interrelated in a sense. So she talked about the importance of inclusivity, make sure that the most rural, the disconnected, the disadvantaged, the marginalized are included, and make sure that when you come up with tools to solve some of the problems, people do have equal access to those tools. Now that the talk is all about, let's shift to online, let's do everything utilizing technology, we have to understand that the level of literacy when it comes to technology is not 100% for every person. You have to understand that at least for me, I've been advocating since the beginning of the pandemic to add to the definition of poverty what we call digital poverty. Because what is going to divide or deepen the divide between those who have and those who have not, be it access to services, to knowledge, to education, is going to be really their literacy, their digital literacy, and access to the hardware and the ability to navigate the software in a way that allows them equal access to those who can do that with their eyes closed. So thank you, Yashashree. I think you just, touched on very key points. Who else would like to add and maybe talk a little bit about some of the angles that we have? Luthfi, go ahead.
Yeah, continuing what Yashashree just mentioned about the inclusivity, I will begin with my story. So this morning I visited my university clinic, and I was asked by the nurse what my height and also my weight. For your information, I am a wheelchair user. I am quadriplegic. So when the nurse asked what my height, so I just answered, I don't know, because the last time I was measured my height, I was like 165 centimeters, but I don't know now. Maybe it increased or maybe decreased. I don't know. And when the nurse asked me about my weight, I couldn't answer it either because I don't know my weight. I couldn't even weight myself in the weight scale, standing weight scale. And there is no, and then I asked back to the nurse, how can I weight myself with this kind of condition? Do you have any measurement, other measurement to estimate my weight from the other anthropometric measurement maybe? And then she just answered that no, you just can estimate what your weight the last time you weighed yourself. So I just answered that I am 60 kilograms. And then that's my simple experience this morning. So what I want to mention is that even that simple thing we couldn't access that simple healthcare um, measurement. The people with living with wheelchair couldn't access uh, that measurement. And then what I experienced also is that it's very difficult for us wheelchair user living in the developing country because all the most of the access is not accessible for us. So what I want to say is that um, us as a wheelchair user, as a minority, as a disability, people with disability, should be a leader for ourselves. I mean, um, we maybe people with authority or decision making, a decision maker, they don't know how to facilitate us. Therefore, we have to be a leader for ourselves to speak up what the needs of ourselves and people with disability. And also, it is kind of cycle. It is mentioned that people living with disability cannot access the social participation because there is no access. However, in the decision making, in the decision maker side, is that they do not provide the access because they don't know how to facilitate the people with disability needs. Therefore, from my point of view is that we need to be a leader for at least ourselves to speak up what the needs for from the people with disability. Once I was asked by the journalist from the ABC last year when we commemorate the International Day of People with disability, they ask me how you advocate yourself, be seen. So we need to be seen by others so that others can aware that we exist. Therefore, they can ask us how to facilitate us. So therefore, I encourage my peer with disability uh, be seen by others. That's all, I think.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. It's extremely humbling, really, to hear you speaking. And it just brings us back to the simple, basic things. Imagine that we are in year 2021, and we're still talking about giving equal rights and access to people with disabilities. That is just beyond anyone's kind of belief. The fact that you are physically disabled does not mean that you, the individual, are disabled. I think you are a very able person. And I agree with you. That sense of agency for people who are facing challenges, accessing, simple services. I mean, to still not figure out how to weigh or take the height of a person with disability is just appalling, to be honest. And then we talk about leadership and we talk about the big concepts. I think we need to go back to the basics and solve the simplest of problems before we talk big. And believe you me, Luthfi, you're not a minority, and you're not and should not even think of yourself as such, because as someone who did a master's degree in special needs, I tell you for a fact that we are all special with needs. There's no such thing as a special need person. We all have different disabilities. Some are seen and some are not. And it is a failure on behalf of the system and the authority, and absolutely an absence of agency or leadership on behalf of those who should be treated equally because they deserve to be treated equally. So when we talk about the leadership or reimagining the leadership, it cannot be that we do that without really making sure that we are as inclusive as can be and facilitate access to all those who need access to whatever service. So I appreciate that angle, and I believe that a future leadership that excludes 1/3 of the global population is a failure leadership and it has to be rethought completely. So I appreciate that. Who else would like to add? Yes, Charlotte, please come in.
Yeah, I think I just want to come in on that point or drive the point home of, and I think you mentioned this when you were doing your overview of like necessary qualities or aspects of leadership is the like not coming at it from a deficit approach. I think that's really important. I think that's something that, when we look at disability, right? We look at disability, but we don't recognize, the needs or sorry, the ability of those people. And I think that's because we're looking at it from a certain lens that has been passed down, through generations, kind of that stem from colonialism and different things like that. And the need to, beyond, when you're approaching or the potential of, I guess, that there is in looking at it from a positivist approach, looking at what's been being done in communities already before you come in with your intervention and identify all that's lacking. Fostering kind of community ideas and innovation, how are they already doing things? How are they doing things well? How can we learn from them? And then how can we share that with other communities across the globe? I think that's kind of one thing our generation is kind of is noticing. And, global sharing as it stands now, I think is kind of masking, what is being done on the ground and what is being done well, and different sources of authority as they currently exist think they have the authority to go in and change things and think they have all the answers. But I think reimagining leadership is reimagining how we look at people's abilities and look at what they have to contribute. And that might look very different than what you have to contribute. But I think that lens is really important.
I absolutely agree with you. I remember when I became a country director for one of the international organizations. That's a personal story. The introduction to the rest of the movement, I was working for an international organization that had 24,800 people all around the globe working for it. So in the announcement, they said, the first Arab Muslim woman. I was like, why did these three feature more importantly than my skills and my years of experience and my proven record of my ability to lead? Why did I need to be boxed into, my origin, my religion, and my gender? And what does that say? The organization was proud of itself for allowing a woman or a Muslim or an Arab to take such position. And it's really humiliating when you start looking at how you are viewed if we take things from a global perspective, because from a global, the eye of the global observer, that ticks the boxes of diversity, but is it really inclusive? And then it says that we, the global, are giving the local agency or voice, which isn't the case, because you know what, if you go to any of the contexts that I was in responding to humanitarian crises, people do survive on their own before the quote unquote, and for lack of better way of saying it, the white savior come to save them. So that kind of colonial approach to sharing knowledge, more importantly to producing knowledge, needs to change. To your point, Charlotte, which I think is spot on, there's a lot of knowledge that is created at the very local level. And by us insisting on knowledge traveling from the north to the south, we are losing a lot of great potentials that we could benefit from if we are humble enough and attentive enough to listen, learn, and then export knowledge from the global south to the global north. And within each context, there's knowledge in every rural area. So the capital city is not the center of the universe. And those living abroad or beyond the geography of the capital city should be included, as both your colleagues said, in decision making. Decisions should be communicated to them, and they should be offered equal access as with those who live closer to the decision-making center. So you're absolutely right. I really want to hear from you guys about this whole idea of the collective nation pride and the positive movements versus the negative ones. Does anyone want to elaborate on that? Is there a need for positivity? I think you talked about positivity, Charlotte. Do we lack enough of that?
I guess I can speak to that a little bit, but anyone else can also. No, I think there is kind of a lack of positivity, and I think that's partly because action is taken when there's only when a deficit does exist, instead of well beyond and resourcing people well before. But I think when it comes down to it, movements start by, or I don't know, I think a movement should be fueled by a love for your country, a love for the people within your country, and a love for people, beyond its borders as well. And I think that should really fuel movement rather than, division and barriers and things like that. So it's coming, when you see collective movements that works, it's really, in my opinion, they're brought together around people who are standing up for each other, people who care for each other deeply, whether they look like that person and have gone through what that person has experienced or not. It's the ability to empathize with the other, and recognize, have awareness of your own positionality and how maybe you have contributed to the marginalization of that person. So it is coming, movements are formed around positivity and positive feelings rather than I view them rather than negative.
I fully agree. When movements sometimes require the etiquette and the the principles of having courageous discussions. Because, for instance, if we take, Black Lives Matter as an example of a very successful movement, it forces us all to engage in tough discussions and look the ugly truth in the eye and be vulnerable enough to admit that, we've done things wrong. And if we are to turn this into a positive movement, then we have to start by being courageous enough to take responsibility for our historical mistakes and then agree together how would that joint future that is inclusive of all of us would look like. So I absolutely agree with you, Charlotte. But don't you have your hand up?
Yeah, Saba, I think those are all very good points. And sort of what I wanted to add on to that is, especially in today's age, I feel there's sort of been a rejuvenation in social movements, and that's largely due to technology. There was a little bit of a lull, and then now globally, more and more people are getting more involved into movements, social movements, and that's largely due to technology because more people are empowered, and it's sort of like democratizing people's voices. Because earlier it was just like the nobility, the elites, or like politicians, the kings, etc., who had this power and that they could like sway opinion. But now anyone can do that. You upload a single video on YouTube or Facebook, and you are like creating a movement that pretty much is like can almost be equal to, let's say, the French Revolution. I mean, we saw the Arab Spring happen. It was largely due to technology. And I think this also brings out a very sort of I guess a sinister aspect of technology, which is like fake news. A lot of movements are essentially being based on manipulated videos. Like deep fakes are becoming more popular, and so like it's more important than ever for us to sort of think more rationally and also like be more analytical when it comes to supporting views. And it's come to the point where we have to sort of do research ourselves, which we never had to before. And even that is once again not reliable because there are so many news websites that essentially run by propagandists. So I feel through the rise of technology and social, like these newer social movements, I think there needs to be a sort of environment that regulates tech companies because they essentially have the power to do this. And I think it's come to a point where a lot of tech companies are now not only more valued and more powerful than a lot of the nations in the world. I mean, I think there's obviously something I think wrong in the world when Apple has greater economic output than pretty much all of Africa combined. So I think it's in interesting times that we live in, and I think we need to like have stronger regulations to sort of prevent us from going into a tech oligarchy of sorts.
Brilliant points. How many characters is the maximum tweet that you can release?
I'm not too sure. I think it's like 200, 150. I'm not sure.
That's now the capacity of our knowledge consumption. And that is really worrying. Most of the messages or the news that we consume nowadays comes in a very, like almost scripted way, like, very, very short. It doesn't tell much. So you don't really know how much lies or how much truth is there. And we don't have the time or the mental ability, unfortunately, to dig a bit behind the number of characters that we receive on a tweet or a breaking news on our smartphones. So you're absolutely right, Vedant. I think it is absolutely critical that we not only use and utilize social media to spread news, but as a consumer, we have to have the responsibility of fact checking the news before we react to it. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day in Lebanon, and he said that he and 16 other youth groups do one thing on social media. They do fact checking. So whenever they see a video or a message or what have you trending, they take it out. They try to fact check it. They do not provide their opinion. They provide the facts that either support it or prove that it is false, so that people can consume the logic behind the message. And unfortunately, this does not serve the interest of those who spread fake news. And we all know that those who are intentionally spreading fake news are not forms of leadership that we would want to follow or be mobilized by. But having said that, they seem to be extremely influential and are able to emotionally provoke enough attention to get people to rally around them. So, as the youth of the world, it is really part of your responsibility to validate and interrogate any news that you consume fairly quickly on social media before it pushes you to act in any particular way. I see Charlotte's hand. Go ahead, Charlotte.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. It is our responsibility to, be consume information in a certain way and validate and fact check and things like that. But I think that really ties in. I was never taught how to do that, and I went to university and things like that, and that's where critical thinking kicked in. Led me through that process, and now I have the ability to go in and question information. But I think that's not the case for everyone. And I think it's a large failure of our education systems not to, I think they've been fairly static throughout at least my lifetime. But to shift and attend to this need is social media is this whole new world, and it's our responsibility to give, even the younger generation than us, the tools they need to be able to navigate websites, Facebook, anything, and bring that critical lens, ask the questions that maybe the media is not wanting them to ask, but giving them the tools to do so. And that kind of also ties back to what I was saying about kind of positionality and the ability to empathize with others. I think that's something that has to be taught from a young age, and give youth kind of like the necessary questions to go through that process for themselves, to have courageous discussions. I think that's something that like really lies within our education systems and is a big, gap currently.
I agree, Charlotte. I think education is the source of all or any change that we would want to or wish to see in the future. Unfortunately, until we get there, because let me tell you this, not being supportive of conspiracy theories, but sometimes I feel it is intentional that education systems are deteriorating. Because if you are graduating ill-educated individuals, then their ability to analyze um, um, and be critical and therefore, critique the performance of those in authority will be much, much less. So it serves authority a lot of good to have ill-educated people who know the basic knowledge but cannot interrogate or question or analyze. And I think it is on the shoulders of those of us who feel that they have such skills to try again to reproduce available knowledge after it goes through the filters of fact checking and in a language that is simple. I'll give you an example. If, as a user of Facebook, if I search for a particular thing, let's say I search for terrorism, all my feed will be taking me in that direction. And if I'm not open-minded enough, I will start getting emotional messages presenting terrorism to be a positive thing or the only tool of change, and presenting all those who do not agree with me as a valid target for me as an emotional terrorist. So what social media does is that it really literally narrows you into a tunnel of interest, a tunnel of focus, and stops you from being able to see broadly beyond your knowledge or your areas of interest. Do that, Google any makeup brand, and you will see that your Facebook starts feeding you more about the products of that makeup brand. All your social media is connected. It all reads from it feeds each other. The algorithm behind it is exactly the same. Okay, so one of the things that I always encourage my sons to do, and they're 24 and 22, I say, when you search for things, try to diversify what you're searching for. Otherwise, Mr. Algorithm will box you into a very narrow box, will corner you, and will stigmatize you as so-and-so lover or so-and-so hater, and all your feed will be coming in that direction. So I think being a leader where you are, be it, you know, in your community, in your firm, in your school, clinic, street, that is a simple thing that we have to advocate for. How do we diversify the sources of knowledge and the types of knowledge that comes our way through social media? Before we bring this to a wrap up, I would love to talk a little bit about your opinions on leadership and COVID-19. Where did we fail? Did we fail? What can change from your perspective? What can be done differently for us to be able to win this battle against a micro virus that no one can see but is bringing us all to our knees? Any tips from the young experts? Yashashree, go ahead.
Yes, so let me trace you to the conclusion from a small story. We all know that Ebola, when Ebola outbreak was there in Nigeria, it was the only country where only 20 cases were there and only 8 people died. Why? Because the people had trust on their healthcare workers. The lady who took decision of quarantining and isolating and distancing everyone from, and a lockdown for that matter, a small lockdown, her team members supported her. No matter how much political force was given, no matter what country's embassy told her that this cannot happen, she was very firm on her decision that yes, this was Ebola and yes, this can be done to stop it. So first and the foremost thing, when one of your team members is trying to speak up, let them speak, believe that it is true. We can always consider that as the worst possibility. We have to consider all the possibilities. This is the first thing. Second thing, the people should have faith in their healthcare workers. And this also goes hand in hand that the healthcare workers should inculcate this, like the education system, when they are learning that they are going to serve for the nation, they should inculcate this sense of pride and honor that they are serving for their nation as the people on border and army does for them, so that they don't back out during the pandemics like Ebola and COVID. Because during COVID, we saw that many of the private health practitioners shut their hospitals down. And that the ratio would have served as a very big, ground. They did not had to, like people in India, we had to convert the sleeper coach of our train into hospitals. If this was the sense inculcated right from first year of medical education, I don't think this would have been the case. And we would be able to control COVID early maybe. And if not control, then at least spread legit factual awareness among people. And one thing I would like to appreciate that this COVID thing was also taking a religion turn. But then there was a certain section of youth which was not at all for this information. And they did not forward stupid messages on WhatsApp University. So this was appreciable. And yes, maybe this much.
Again, so for things to be done differently, we need courageous individuals who are principled, who can, do not fear to speak up and take risks, calculated risks, to avoid bigger risks. And the use of the example is definitely spot on, Yashashree, so thank you for that. Was COVID-19 politicized? Anyone would like to engage in that? Is vaccination being politicized? I live in the UK. I got my first jab. Almost 32 million people got vaccinated in the UK. And we were engaging with a group, an advocacy group the other day, and we said, how many vaccines did we donate to countries that can't afford the cost of vaccines, because you know you can vaccinate the entire country, but we are not safe until the entire world is safe. You understand that? You understand that it doesn't work country by country. And they were like, you know, each country needs to care for its own people. So now we do have a couple of, you know, global campaigns that are advocating for global financing of vaccination at you know, a global scale, but we're nowhere there. So do you feel that some people are more important than others when it comes to access to vaccination? Vedant.
Yeah, I definitely think that this entire pandemic demonstrated that I think, first of all, everything is politicized in our world, even when it comes to saving lives in a pandemic. I think that's just how the nature of the systems and political system that we built, when, I mean, let's be honest, like the whole system is essentially built on, grants and donations from donor countries, and then you have like vested interests. So yeah, I feel that our entire system is sort of politicized to that extent. But at the same time, I felt that, there could be much greater collaboration. I feel that, the fact that we sort of did so poorly in the beginning with this pandemic kind of scares me, like, what if something much worse happens in the future? And if this is the, by sort of partisanship and like essentially, countries falling into different blocks, and, sort of politicizing the whole issue, even at the UN and the WHO, it kind of scares me because it shows that there's a lot of mistrust that exists. Between especially the big powers. I think the world is slowly sort of transitioning from a unipolar world where it was dominated by America to one which is more bipolar or multipolar. And, whenever there's more than one leader or more than, one king, there's going to be, let's say there's going to be some amount of tension. And I think it's just a reflection of how geopolitics is evolving in the world, and we're entering into a world where I think it's pretty much going to be impossible to not politicize something. I think that's just the nature of the world that we're heading into. At least that's how I see it currently.
Charlotte, I think Luthfi is it? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Speaking about the political factors that influence the pandemic, in our country, Indonesia, in the beginning of the pandemic, our government seems not to take this pandemic seriously. So, in the beginning of the pandemic, when other countries restrict the movement of the people, our countries like promoting the tourism. So I don't know behind these economic issues. So our government like have dilemma between the health and economic. I think that's also happened in other countries, but the risk communication of our government seems to have unstructured and also unsynchronized between one authority and the other. So it led to the confusion of our people. So now people become they do not obey anymore with the health protocol and the COVID prevention, I think. And then, yeah, I don't know, behind that economic factors, economic issue, maybe there are other big problem or other big influence in that kind of issue. I think that's all.
Yes,
Thanks.
maybe reset as a result of everything that we've been going through. You know, the economic system, the currencies around the world, the trade exchange, everything seems to be shifting. And that's why I think that it's timely that we talk about reimagining leadership, because if certain systems are being reset as we speak, it matters a lot that young people have a say on what would the new shape of systems look like. And I think, I mean, my personal fear as someone who's not young anymore is that systems are being recreated to fill in the gaps of the old systems rather than being created from scratch with fresh eyes and with enough sense of responsibility to where the old systems did not serve everyone on this planet, irrespective of where they are, how they're classified or whatever. Charlotte, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, in terms of the failures of this pandemic, I think in the response is I think responses to pandemic from now for pandemics, I don't know, hopefully there are not many in the future, but they have to be organized on behalf of the most underserved, the most vulnerable in your country. I think Canada is a prime example of how they completely failed at that, with long-term care homes being kind of the hardest hit. And it's like your response strategy needs to be focused on protecting those populations. And I think that's not, I think why it was so difficult is it's not the culture, it's not how systems function in this country. The elderly are, you know, cast aside by the time they reach 80, as soon as they have some kind of decrease in function, and put in these homes that are not where we should be putting humans. You know, especially I can speak to Canada, I can speak to the US. It's just not, they're not valued like they are in other cultures. And yeah, so I think, you know, changing that narrative, changing the way we plan, changing the way we bring resources together, and changing kind of the targets of those resources, I think will be key in our responses in the future, and bringing that to a global scale as well. I think, yeah, there's a lot of talk about protecting your community during the pandemic, but that also fosters kind of an insular view and an insular outlook. So, you know, how can we get people, you know, not only thinking about their community, but also thinking about that community across the globe that might not have the same resources that you do, and how can we protect them, and starting that conversation early on.
I agree,
Yeah.
Charlotte. There was a paper produced by Imperial College about the fact that it is not the systems that failed us. It is the systemic failure of the culture that failed us, because our systems were embraced by a culture, and the culture excludes the non-productive or the underproductive. And therefore, by default, the systems are not designed to serve them best. And, you know, I mean, there were debates in certain places in the UK about the fact that the elderly are becoming a burden on the health system. So actually, if some of them disappear, that would be good for the future. We went to that extent in being so dismissive of whoever we believe is not productive, forgetting about the legacy that they've left, the contribution to the tax paying, the contribution when they were younger. So you feel like, you know, after which age would I be dropped off the service systems, and it would be okay for me to die quietly because I become a cost and not necessarily a productive element of society. So that's really scary. And I think ethically and morally, COVID-19 challenged us from the very micro level, which is your neighborhood, to the macro level, which is the global. And until we understand and realize that we are as strong as the weakest link, we will not overcome the challenges we are dealing with right now. So, I mean, we can talk about this forever, or we can start to maybe bring the discussion back to leadership. And just to close this session of the webinar, I'd like to ask each one of you to describe to me, what would they do differently, or why would they be distinguished leaders? May they be offered the chance to lead? What would you bring to the mix that we do not have right now? What makes you unique? And you don't have to think only of yourself, but think of other youth that you hear from, talk to, interact with. What's your perspective to leadership as it should be? Who'd like to go first? And be free to imagine. I mean, the beauty of you is that you're still not as horrible as we are. You have lots of vibrant, creative brain cells, much more than I do at least. So if you are to reimagine, what would that look like? Yeah,
I can
Go
go
ahead.
first.
Please.
I think what I see in youth, or a big strength. And how I reimagine leadership, I guess, is kind of collective leadership, even though that sounds counterintuitive. But I think youth are very good at essentially, they know their strengths, and they acknowledge that other people have strengths that might be their limitation. And I think I don't see this culture amongst youth today as like, oh, I want to do everything. I want to be, I want to be the best at everything so that I can be the best person and like, lead. It's more so, oh, I know I'm good at this. I know my friend is good at that. And like, let's come together and like create change, and relying on all our strengths and, growing together. And I think that's something that I see as unique in the younger generation. So like, acknowledging our strengths as a collective and moving forward.
Collective leadership approach. When we were growing up, we were taught that, the one-man show is the only right show. So you have to be the boss. Now we understand that leadership is a plateau that can really take as many people as you can imagine, as long as they are organized and can, deliver what they promise. Very good point. Yashashree, unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. Yeah, after collaborative leadership, this is what I think youth is good at, that we do not take, much stress in telling people how to do their work. As we have decentralized all the powers, it has been followed from a long time, that we are okay that if the power is decentralized to my junior or someone else in my team. So after this step, I think we do not stress much to tell people how to do the work. We just tell them what to do, and we keep faith on them that they will do this right, no matter what.
So you believe in those who you work with, and you feel comfortable to communicate and speak out easily. Yeah, great point.
Yes, and then there comes a point of counseling. Counseling the people you communicate with. Don't just give orders, counsel them, why do they need it? So I am not sure if this example fits right in, but Indira Gandhi, the only man in cabinet, one of the most successful leaders, even she costed her election results because she imposed sterile operations and birth control surgical methods. She ordered people that this much population should be covered, this much operations should be done. And there's a small video, I think, of 8 to 9 minutes on YouTube. It says something like war. If you see that, you can relate to what I am saying. So orders will just cost you your powers, nothing else. So counsel people.
Yeah, walk the talk, simplify your communication, mentor and monitor, hold hand. Do not always lead from, the front side. Sometimes you have to lead from behind. So that humbleness and humility takes a lot of courage. Unfortunately, most of our authoritarian figures that we mistakenly call leaders are so scared of being understood, because they know if they speak vaguely, they can avoid being held accountable by people who understand that they're just, speaking nonsense, basically. I'm seeing very interesting comments coming our way as well about the importance of inclusivity, effective partnership with others, teamwork need to be faced, held accountable. Absolutely right. So a lot of engagement from the participants as well, or the audience, with your very positive approach to leadership. If you are to become a leader, would you become politicized? Well, you may. Okay, you may. You'd be surprised, but every movement has to take a structured approach. And when the structured approaches come in, they become politicized, whether we like it or not. So we're not trashing politics here. We're just saying that moral, ethical, political approaches are critical. And potentially, as you rightly said, when you have ran the course and are done being creative, innovative, engaging, tentative to people's, sensitive to people's feedback, then maybe it's time to step down. Because I always say that change in leadership can happen either through evolution or revolution. Revolutions can start, but you never know how they're going to end. Evolutions is all about the how we develop and evolve over time to become better human beings. So I hope that when you become leaders, you become principled politicians and you take us into a place that is better than the world we live in right now. I'm so humbled by your contributions. I think all the messages that you've shared with us were spot on, and food for thought, I'd say. That would really help us hopefully reimagine with a little bit more colors, because unfortunately our imagination now is in black and white, but doesn't have all the shades of beautiful colors in between. With that, Jean-Francois, I bring this part to a closure and I hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saba, and congratulations for the panel, for your comments and the reaction from the fellows. And we have two questions from the Q&A. The first one comes from Monica Herder from the Europe Lange Foundation. And she asked, what is the role of the emotional intelligence in your feeling? What do you think?
I think when I talked about the personal set of skills, this is all about emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, or someone with little emotional intelligence, cannot mobilize people. When we mobilize people, at least that's from my personal experience, and I'm happy to be challenged, we talk to their emotions before we talk to their brains. So if you are a responsible leader, you would want to make sure that the emotional message is in sync and aligned with the responsible mental message. Otherwise, we can mobilize people to go the wrong way. If you look at all um, the concepts of activism around the world, from the worst, like say something like ISIS, all the way to the best we have in modern history, like Black Lives Matter, they all are based on emotional intelligence and emotional mobilization. So talking to people's fears, talking to people's insecurities can be either used to manipulate how people feel, and therefore they come to you because they feel that you are offering them a sense of agency, or can be a way to get the best out of people. But I mean, to the one who asked this question, I'd say if I ever have a position in a global ministry for education, I would definitely advocate for teaching emotional intelligence from a very, very early age, because it's critical in shaping the world to become more human and human-centric than it is right now. I don't know if any of the fellows would like to add to that.
Okay, thank you. We have another comment. In the discussion, we have an interesting remark from Christine Biche from France, and she said that the principal enemy now is ourselves. And she mentioned also that many times it's a lack of positive criticism and creativity. And she suggested in the Q&A having some shared vision, some sharing. I think that the Pope last weekend spoke a lot about sharing, the necessity to share and to stop to speak about, because you are Muslims, I am Christians, you are from Africa, I am from Europe, our culture, we need to overpass that point, and we really need to try to develop some shared and common vision. What is your comments, Saba, on that?
I'm in total agreement. Look, there's no such thing. We all believe in the same principles and values. Do no harm, be good. I don't think that any religion would advocate to anything that sounds any different from the the basic good. So I always say there are those who believe in God and do little good, and those who believe in good but do not believe in God, and those who their belief in God pushes them to do good. Please do not be in the first category of those who believe in God and do little good. That's I believe in good, and I think good is what makes us human. So the common ground that brings us together is the goodness in us and our human drive to be good not only to ourselves but to others. If someone is drowning, would you ask them whether they're Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists before you pull them out, before you rescue them? Or what is it that your human nature would push you to save them, period? So just be human. It's as simple as that. I think religion, faith, origin, race were all used in a very politicized manner to divide us. Because remember, the more divided we are, the easier it is to control us. If we are united in our humanity, then I don't think there's a faith on earth that would advocate against that. If we are united in our humanity, we will take the world to task when they fail to respond to the most vulnerable in the most rural place on earth. The good of any human fellow is the the responsibility of all of us. So my request from you before we talk about abstract concepts like authority, leadership, and systems is to go back to the basics. Be human, because that is the first step to sustainable, substantial change in our collective behavior. Be human. Charlotte, I see your hand up.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. Fundamentally, we are all human. I think to get there, or to help people get to a space where they can acknowledge beyond labels, I think there's a significant amount of rebuilding of deep divides that we need to do, and that is all tied into trust. How can we trust one another again? And how can we understand that the systems we function in, the leadership we might have seen thus far, has told us to think a certain way about a certain group of people, and how can we shift that? How can we come down to these fundamentals that unite us all? And I think trust is really the pathway. Trust, relationship building, and yeah, significant efforts into trying to build that or rebuild trust. Yeah.
Yeah, Charlotte, and that's why I believe that the younger generation has better chances in getting the leadership right. I mean, fortunately or not, as you know, we're the products of our societies and our times. My time was based on, a huge promotion for individuality. Care for yourself. Don't care about anything. Succeed on your own. Be number one in everything you do. That whole concept of divide and conquer, which was a product of colonialism, is now, I mean, with the younger generation, they don't like that. They don't feel that this represents them. So I think that there is a paradigm shift in principles and concepts that you have much better chance than we did or do right now to advocate for and hopefully bring to the forefront of what the future leadership would look like.
Saba, I have another question for you from Catherine Marshall from the World Faith Development Dialogue from the Georgetown University in Washington. Catherine asks you, Saba, in your various roles, what have you found are the best practices in giving voice and power to new models of leadership? What is your approach in your current function? And she adds something, let me go further. She adds something, and Catherine asked how to translate the principles on which there is insight and agreement into practice.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That's an extremely interesting question. So I was a humanitarian responder for quite an extended period of time. And then there was a moment in time during the Syria response where I realized that, wait a minute, I'm just distributing Band-Aids here. You don't solve the problem of refugees by giving them food parcels. We have to rethink the social fabric. And I started doing my own research, and I found that the least financed attempts are attempts to positive change. So where I am right now, I work for a foundation where we literally finance change from within. If you talk about leadership and you want to promote youth approach to leadership, positive, collaborative, common ground building, human-centric, you would find very few donors who are willing to finance such change, because it's not, excuse my French, it's not sexy. It doesn't sell. No one wants to finance peace. And to be honest with you, the only way forward is if we finance change to happen by those who can lead us, the youth, in a way that is positive, youthful, creative, imaginative. So that's what we do. We finance change where it's happening. We are now, for instance, financing huge advocacy for inclusion of LGBT in certain countries in the Middle East. We're talking about this is a taboo. You know, we finance a positive change or a democratic change of authority. We finance platforms that facilitate critique of government performance, because until people own the tools and have the space to come together as a positive tribe and have that sense of collectiveness, because you know, as an individual, it's really hard for me to fight against an army. But if I start building a sense of tribal belonging to a tribe of good cause, then the fight is most probably easier to win, or the pain will be distributed among all of us. So I would genuinely advocate to start by financing positive change. Unfortunately, as donors, if you look at all the calls for proposals that are released on a regular basis, you will find that we always intervene after the fact. We react to problems, we react to crises, we react to disasters. We do not invest enough in prevention. We do not invest in positive change. We invest in the pain that comes after the fact. So I'd say it's a paradigm shift in how we think as donors, as foundations and agencies and organizations, and as young group, go to those who can support you to be the positive change you want to see.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Saba. I will have a short question for all of you, Saba, and the four fellows. And let's start with the fellows. You know, we speak a lot about worries in all over the world with these COVID-19 outbreaks. You know that in our country, in France, we have a new lockdown since the last week and so on, and the hope, the vision from the young generation is very limited and so on. And I would like very much for working with all of you and seeing every day your optimism, positivism, your hope. What would be the advice that you would like to give the other fellow in the world about the way that they have to consider the future with the pandemics? One word for each, 2 words maximum. Who starts?
One word.
Yeah, Charlotte, go on, please.
One word to describe, to tell youth everywhere to survive the pandemic. But I think persistence, and that's because I think, you know, above and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, youth are struggling with a mental health pandemic of sorts. I think it's been very challenging on most youth, this series of lockdowns, and we're at kind of an inflection point in our lives where we're supposed to be pursuing the opportunities, and those aren't really available to most and many at the current moment. So you'll get there. Persistence.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. Who else?
Can I?
Yeah. Vedant,
yeah, I was just saying, I would say empathy, because I think, the pandemic's been pretty harsh for some people. People have like lost family members, lost their jobs, and there's been a lot of sort of negative things that have come out of it. So I think it's more important to be empathetic than ever. Even if there's people who you don't necessarily like, or like there's like whatever your view out or outlook of the world might be. I think it's important to be a little bit more empathetic, and I guess recognize that everyone has struggles, and some people might not show it, and they might actually project it onto others. But I think it's important to recognize that it might just be that they're struggling.
Thank you, Vedant. Luthfi, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I think become resourceful and adaptive through this pandemic, through this hardship. We need to be adapt with this struggle, but still um, we can take like positive impact from this pandemic, though the negative impact is more than the positive impact. But I think we can learn something from this pandemic. So yeah, maybe from me it's adaptive and resourceful. Maybe we can take something from this pandemic positively. Thanks.
Thank you. Yashashree?
The word from me is vigilant. And yes, I think let's be vigilant about whatever comes before you. So be vigilant. And I'm not sure if I am well versed with the concept of optimism bias, but I'm not sure. So I'm not putting that. So let's just go with vigilant.
Thank you. Saba, what do you think?
Yeah, I think nourish the feminine side of leadership, because the femininity of leadership is motherly. It is inclusive by nature. It knows how to love unconditionally, and I think the world needs some of that to heal. And maybe this would indirectly address a question in the chat box around the role of women. Historically, it was proven that women in leadership or authority positions are the least corrupt and the most inclusive, and there's statistics to support that. So I'd say let's embrace our feminism, and remember that we're in this together. My word to the youth, particularly to my two sons, I keep asking them to take care of their mental health, because this is something that we will need to talk about and we will need to address once this pandemic is over. The cost of mental health and the implications on our well-being globally is going to be very expensive and will need to be addressed by a leadership that knows and is not ashamed to manage with love. So that would be really my message to all, embrace the feminism in you.
Thank you very much, Saba, and really thank you very much for this very nice conference. It was you managed the idea, Saba, with Olivia and with the fellows to try to have this kind of dialogue. We appreciate it very much, and I hope that the participant and the audience also. Thank you for the audience for the way that you contributed and the question you asked, and come back to Charlotte when once again, Charlotte, in 2019, when we organized the IMSA Forum, you made the suggestions to engage the youth and to work with the youth. And we said, okay, let's do the challenge, let's do it. Then due to your great idea, it's really a pleasure to share with people like Saba with more experience, more expertise, but with your dynamism and your faith in life, which is something important. Then thank you very much for all of that. It's a pleasure really to work with all of you. Thanks again, Saba, for your contribution. It's always a pleasure, and to find the time to dedicate it for a few time for us. I appreciate that always. You spoke about women and leadership. That's going to be one of the topics that we are going to speak about during the next IMSA Forum in June.